Chris, when did you get the call and what was the reaction when you this came up for you?
A couple of weeks ago, I think, but it had been earmarked that the game was, being workshopped. So I was aware of the concept, but still was excited to get the call. It wasn't the most exciting period of my life, so to get a little bit of a spark, at that time was a good thing. I've always been an advocate for it. I don't think anyone should pretend in our game that State of Origin is the pinnacle. It's not, and it shouldn't impact the priorities that clubs have. But I think in working through it, the AFL have done a really good job, especially with the involvement of the clubs, but more importantly the support of the players, to come up with a time frame where virtually every team will be playing practice games anyway, and give the opportunity to the best players in the competition to represent their state. And for my part in that, I feel like that's a real privilege and one that I take seriously.
You obviously haven't been able to speak to you since the grand final. What's the last month been like for you? Adam Simpson talking about coaches going to the cave after matches like that. How has it been for you?
Yeah, I'm as good as anyone at that. So I'm still in it to an extent, not really. I'm enjoying the fact that, with the exception of likely the next 10 minutes, I won't have to talk about it much for another few months at least. But it's been okay. We take the same approach that I think we do every year. Sometimes it's a bit more bitter than at other times, but generally, the likelihood is you're going to lose the last game of the season and you'll be bitterly disappointed. So you deal with it as well as you possibly can. That's not easy, but pretty quickly, in my experience anyway, the excitement and the things that you've got to look forward to gradually take over. And I don't see any reason why we shouldn't, and I shouldn't be optimistic about what the future holds.
Is it disappointing to not come away with Charlie Curnow and or Rowan Marshall?
Well, maybe we'll get the opportunity mid-February for them to play in the Big V jumper. I think that's probably likely. Shouldn't guarantee anyone at the moment. I've had a bit of a cursory glance at the list of players that are available. There are 60 locks at the moment in my mind, so that's going to be difficult to work through.
How many calls have you received since you were announced? Have you got guys throwing themselves at you?
A couple. I respect their privacy, but I think it is a bit of a measure of not only the willingness but the excitement to be included. And this reminds me a little bit of, I can't remember exactly when it was, but the attitude around the international rules a while ago. And when I first was approached to work with Alistair Clarkson and Ross Lyon around that, the sell was that this is going to be for the best players. And my sense is that that's the real hook for this concept as well, that it will be available to the best players. And it's not going to work if the best players don't really embrace it. And every indication we've got is that that's the case. So if the international rules was a really positive experience, and it was an outstanding one. It was great for me personally. It was a really good experience. This will be that on steroids.
What are your memories of 1999 as a Brisbane player of the last time Origin was played?
Oh, well, not much. You'd have to remind me.
Victoria, South Australia 99, I think the story goes that...
Was that Tony Hall?
No, it was
okay.
A big squad of players were selected, and Robert Walls walks into the room and says anyone who doesn't want to be here can leave, and a lot of players got up and left because clubs came over the top of representing your state. So, like, as a player back then, I don't know if you had a tap on the shoulder to play, or
now you
what
remind
the going to be?
Well, I think these things are always better when you actually do deal with them authentically and honestly and realistically. And I can't remember that, but I'll try to sort of speak to the description you've given. And if that was the case and there was any doubt, they shouldn't have done it. And if anyone was pretending that this State of Origin game is going to be the pinnacle of our game, they're kidding themselves, and we should go back to the drawing board. What this has the potential to be is an outstanding opportunity for the best players in the game to play with and against each other. in a period of the season where it's not only not a drag on the clubs, but it's actually a positive. So, at least from a Geelong perspective, our attitude is we're very, very optimistic that our best players will be playing in that weekend anyway. And the ones I've spoken to, their strong preference is to play in an Origin game as opposed to a practice game at a nondescript venue. I can say with confidence, maybe need a bit of support from the AFL people here, but I know enough about the environment in WA. I coached as an assistant there at Fremantle for 3 years. In mid-Feb, they're starved of footy. If it's not a sellout at Optus Stadium, I'll be staggered. And again, my experience is the best players actually do have a thirst to play with each other. Again, we're going to have to leave out some bona fide champions from the Victorian team. So if you look at it from that perspective alone, what a great honour it is to not only get selected, but start building something. I'd be very surprised if this wasn't, given the best players play, because there is that caveat, but I'd be very surprised if this isn't an outstanding success and it builds to something much, much bigger in the following year. But again, I know enough to know, leave Victoria out of it, but I know enough to know that the South Australian and WA markets in particular, by the time it gets to mid-Feb, they're pretty thirsty for some footy, and it doesn't get much better than seeing the best players pitted against each other.
Just one specific example, as Geelong coach, how do you wrestle with Patrick Dangerfield? He'll be 35, it's 7 months before you hope to have him playing in a final series. Putting him in this environment compared to resting him and having him cherry ripe for round one, how do you sort of manage that expectation?
Well, I think that's a good example. I mean, it sort of helps explain why I think the timing's optimal. Our preference, and every club thinks about these things a little differently, I suspect, but our preference is for him to have played some practice games before round one. And that goes for all of our players, from Patrick at 35 through, ideally our sort of first and second year players. So the reality is they'll be playing anyway. Now, good coaches that I've had dealings with over the years, when you talk about mitigating injury risk, you can get injured in a practice game, you can get injured, in a home and away game. That's just a risk that you need to take. So I think it's likely that over time there will be sort of injuries in these games. I would kind of caution people from overreacting to those and acknowledge that could well have happened at a practice game in Bunbury. And again, that time will tell a little bit, but my suspicion is that most clubs and most players, if they're playing that weekend, would prefer to be playing with WA or Victoria as opposed to their club in that week.
Chris, firstly, congrats on the role. Secondly, assistant coaches. I think it's in the NRL you might have a choice of that. What's your sort of early inkling of who you'd like to work alongside?
I'm still working through that. It's the thing that, and when you talked about previous Origin games, the one that I remember two. One as a kid, watching as a Hawthorn supporter, watching Dunstall and Lockett and Ablett and same forward line, just thinking this is. As a kid, I thought it was as good as it got. And then the other one was a bit more inconsequential, but there was a game in 2008 where Victoria played the Allies. As it was, the Victorian coaching staff and support staff, and basically everyone was from Geelong. Mark Thompson kind of coached that team. But they did make an exception for one first-year assistant coach who was a Victorian coaching over at Fremantle, and that was me. And it was an amazing experience. Really helpful for me as a coach. I mean, I met Steve Hocking for the first time in that week. So in that context, I kind of think to myself, it would be a nice opportunity to think about how maybe some of the younger coaches could get some exposure to that environment. And I've already spoken to a couple of coaches who have said you only get a few chances in your life to coach all the best players. It doesn't matter how good your team is at Clubland, you're never going to be able to put a team together that has the very best players in the comp. So That's my long-winded way of saying I'm not exactly sure how we're going to go, but it is probably an insight into the way I'm thinking about it right at the moment.
From afar, has there been a specific player that you'd much prefer to have their magnet on your board as opposed to someone else?
Oh, I've been thinking a bit about Charlie Curnow over the last couple of weeks, so yeah, I'd be very surprised if he wasn't someone I'd like to see wearing the big V. It's a long list, so I shouldn't individualise too much. But the ones that sort of sprang to mind for me was the players at either end of their careers to an extent. I'm not retiring Marcus Bontempelli, but has he played for Victoria? I suspect not.
I think in the Bushfire game in 2020.
Oh, 2020. So, okay. I don't want to disparage the 2020 Bushfire game. I would suspect this is a different situation. This is as close as we're going to get to the real deal. And the chance for him at this stage of his career as probably the preeminent player in the competition. I hope that's exciting for him, and it's certainly exciting for me to get a bit of exposure to what he could do. And I think about some of the young players that could get picked. I mean, he's a lock, but he's still a young player, like Nick Dacos, sort of coming into that team. Like, you'd be crazy, or at least you don't think that much about these sort of things, and I tend to. If you haven't, as a coach at one stage, thinking about, if he were in our team, how would we use him? And kind of the mind boggles a little bit, but yeah, I mean, there are others as well. I mean, even, I'm not sure that Tom Stewart's played for Victoria. And that seems sort of crazy to me, that in my mind, and I'm highly biased, so with that on the table, I think he's been the best defender of a generation. And for him to get the chance to play for Victoria is something that he would relish, and I'd love to see him in that environment.
Chris, we usually ask you if you'll tag Nick Dacos. Do you expect WA to tag Nick Dacos?
What does Craig McRae say? I think he says, like, go your hardest or something. And well, this is probably one of the rare situations where there might be someone just as good sitting next to him, so it might be a hard choice. But I think, I haven't heard everything that Dean Cox has said, but I already get the suspicion that he's taking this seriously. It'd be a packed crowd over at Optus. They've already got sort of the home ground advantage. The one mistake I suspect you can make is to sort of go into the game and say, oh, let's just let the players do their thing. We'll certainly be taking an approach that just because it's full of stars, we don't expect the star power to prevail without any structure and system. So it wouldn't surprise me if they were thinking that way too.
Couple more, Chris. Just a question outside of Origin. Obviously, Bailey Smith, the warning came through from the AFL. What was your take on that?
I'm not aware of it. I'm aware that there was some communication, but it's not. I haven't seen it. It's been communicated to me that there was some communication, but nothing around the content. So probably a question better directed at those people. Probably the broad observation I would make is I'm really supportive. I'm speaking for myself more than I am for Geelong in this case. I've said it publicly enough, I think, for it not to be a surprise. But I'm broadly supportive of the idea that the AFL and the clubs work together on these issues. It's not, at least in my opinion, it shouldn't be a matter of there's the head office that's in charge of enforcement and there's the clubs that are involved in dealing with the issues. We should be working collaboratively together. And that's actually been my experience behind the scenes. I choose not to listen or read too much of what's said around these issues, but my suspicion is there's a bit of a disconnect around the perception of some of these issues and how they're being handled and the actual reality. I think there is a level of collaboration and understanding. So it's not that everything's fine all the time, but it's certainly not that there's this explosion of discomfort or unhappiness with each other. I think the two parties are pretty closely aligned on where all this stuff's at.
Have you spoken with Bailey?
No, I'm very conscious of respecting the players' privacy and desire to get away. When was the last time I spoke to him? Pretty recently. I have spoken to him between the end of the season and say a week or so ago. But If the next bit is, what did you talk about? Maybe we haven't been in many press conferences together, but I tend not to divulge private conversations. I mean, I don't think the AFL should either, and I'm not suggesting that they do. But these things do have a habit of partial information kind of getting out and then being extrapolated. So I get your part. If you don't have all the information, you have no choice but to extrapolate. The point I would make when I've spoken to Bailey is we think while it's imperfect at the moment, it's in a pretty good spot. I wouldn't fret too much if I were you.
Steve Hawking,
Not that I should tell you what to
last
do.
one. Steve Hawking indicated there'd be a sit down with him about his behaviour last week. Is that realistic that there will be a proper sit down, or is this something you do in multiple different chats about him as something goes on?
Well, I didn't hear what he said, but if he was referring to the fact that we communicate with our players regularly and work through lots of different things, well, I mean, we're always trying to. We almost wear it as a badge of honour that we don't consider our role as one of ownership of our players. Okay, that's just not the way we think about the world. Okay, but there is sort of an expectation that we will work together, hopefully as much as possible as peers, to continually get better. Now, I hesitate to bring that sort of stuff up because it does give the impression that it amplifies the current situation to a point where I don't think it is. Now, I can't control that others might choose to amplify that, but what I would say is we're really confident that it's in a really good spot. And again, if you sort of separate out sort of the off-field issues, that's probably the best way to describe it. And if we sort of think through how the last 12 months have gone with Bailey, it's been an outrageous success. Outrageous. Not perfect, but if you are privy to some of the information with a whole range of our players, I think it's likely that that's going to be a similar sort of description. That some bits have gone really, really well, and there are other bits that we've sort of got to, nudge and manage a little bit. But that's all it is. Like it's a nudge here and there. So I refuse to buy into the idea that that there's some, serious, that there's major work to be done. I just don't believe that to be true.
Can I also ask one more? Just the fact that the AFL...
Happy to keep going.
The fact that the AFL did step in, though, is there any concern from your perspective that the club is finding it hard to manage Bailey Smith?
No, I accept that some people would like that to be the case, but I can't say it any more clearly that I don't think it is. In fact, I'll double down again. We welcome more communication from the AFL. We view it as our role as a collective, the clubs and the AFL should be to work together to get the best outcome for everyone. We are not. Occasionally you end up being adversarial, but when that's happened, it's because something's gone wrong. It's not the intention. So far from being concerned that they've reached out, I think it's a real positive thing. It's not as if they're sort of sitting back in a silo and not helping us. I think it's the opposite. I think there's good collaboration there.
Do you think he understands the enormity of this though? Like every time he does something online, it just creates extra work for the club, the AFL. Like, isn't it as simple as just drawing a line and putting your phone away? Like, does he grasp where this is at?
Well, you should. If you have doubts about that, I mean, maybe it's a question that you should ask him. But I'm not sure that you can ask that question with a straight face, Mitch. I don't think you think it is more work. I think it's manna from heaven for you. I think you're the one that potentially might be thinking that this is a whole heap of work for everyone. It's just not the way we see it. Like, so I get that might be the impression that's being created. It's not much more work. It's been an outrageous success for us. So there are parts. That's not to say that everything's perfect. It's not. We acknowledge that part. I think it's been acknowledged a number of times. But to build this up to be something that it's not is just not something I'm going to buy into.
What's your emotion as coach when you saw the pictures of Max Home dressed as one of the industry's most respected journalists in Caroline Wilson, and then that's accompanied with a water splashing emoji that came from Bailey Smith's Instagram account?
So I don't live in that social media world. I guess like the big win for me personally over the last few weeks is that the players aren't dressing up for Mad Monday anymore. I've never been a fan of it. But I've never had, and I don't think Steve Hawking he's not that type of guy. Andrew Mackey's certainly not. Like so, but hopefully it sort of explains a little bit the way we think of the world. Just because I don't like it doesn't mean that I should impose my will on the rest of the players. Like, obviously, it's a safer thing to do to not dress up. Most controversies, at least from good people, pop up when an attempt at humour falls flat. And I think that's what these sort of things are. So I think Max, and again, I don't even pay much attention. I go to our drinks on a Monday after the last game as late as possible so I can avoid most of this nonsense. But they did tell me that Max is dressed up as a journalist. Is this the third year in a row? Yeah. Did you do image?
Did
How
last
did
did
that?
some work, I reckon.
Yeah. So, I mean, the way I tend to approach life is I assume good intent, and it would be helpful if other people did as well. But you know that's not going to be the case. So, this is one where I assume good intent, but sometimes you can be well intentioned and try to make a gag that either falls flat or crosses the line. I think the real issue is, when it becomes, when it's at the expense of someone else, I think you should think hard about it, and that's probably what we're talking about.
We might finish there, Greg. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.